Stop the presses.
Bill could be entitled Journalism 101.
Florida's bill targeting anonymous sources and defamation heads to the House floor.
This bill is unconstitutional. It goes against free speech.
The facts and the friction with the rep seeing it through. Stopping the scroll.
Keeps them on the platform for hours and hours and hours.
The bill taking kids' accounts off social media hits the governor's desk.
We have the ability to make sure that we do protect kids.
Will he sign or won't he?
We'll be wrestling with that.
There are 33 of 1,067 Manatee Bay students that do not have an MMR vaccine.
Measles on the move, a dangerous disease back from oblivion and in South Florida.
The state has chosen not to do all the things it could do to help contain it.
The latest and your chance to ask your own questions. Get ready to get online. The big news of the week, all live this week in South Florida.
Good morning. Welcome. I'm Glenna Milberg. A lot to get to today. The numbers, they are rising this weekend. More cases added to the outbreak of measles, school-related, at least one travel-related, and Florida health officials are raising the alarm. Later in this program, we will have the latest on the outbreak and the response, and also what you can do to keep yourself and your family healthy. And we invite you to send in any question you may have for real-time answers right here on the air. Take note of this address. It's twisf@wplg.com. That's the email. Or you can also use Twitter, X, at WPLG Local 10. First, though, two of the most controversial bills of the state lawmaking session are in play, and we begin with the one that gives Governor DeSantis a deadline. Both the Florida House and Senate passed that bill that takes kids under 16 off social media platforms, and he has until March 1st, the end of this week, to sign it. That bill is meant to address purposefully addictive components of social media and mental health. Some question whether that's state government's role to manage, or does that role go to parents? The governor is one of those doing the questioning.
While I think that there are harms associated with that, I do think parents could supervise in ways where it's used in ways that could be beneficial. So those are things I think you gotta strike that proper balance when you're looking at these things between policy that is helping parents get to where they want to go versus policy that may be just outright overruling parents. And so we'll be wrestling with that.
So will he or won't he sign it? In the House, where it was the Speaker's priority bill, it passed with pretty big bipartisan support. Only 7 representatives voted against it. State Rep Ashley Gant was one of them. Democrat repping a long corridor of mid-Miami-Dade right here at the table with us to get into it. So nice to have you here.
Thank you,
Welcome.
Glenna. It's a pleasure to be here.
So tell me, why did you vote against this? A lot of your colleagues were totally on board with this bill. Why not?
So I want to start with the history of the bill. So last session, Rep. Michelle Rayner from Pinellas County actually filed a bill. It got to the House floor to hold social media companies accountable. And I voted up on that bill because I do think that there needs to be something done. However, when we saw the second iteration of her bill, it was some portions of her bill, and then it was a whole lot of other stuff. And the other stuff is basically what I could not get on board with.
So that other stuff, just to be specific, is what?
The parental consent. So
okay.
Over and over and over in the legislature, we continue to hear parental rights, parental rights. We have books being banned. The dictionary in Escambia County has been banned for parental rights and making sure parents have the ultimate say.
Factually not banned, just taken, challenged, and going through the process.
Okay.
Just for the record.
So it's going through that process,
Mm-hmm.
right? For parental choice, to make sure that parents have the ultimate say. And so when we come to this bill and social media, when we had the ability to hold these companies accountable with Rep. Rayner's bill, we added a lot more, and that a lot more for me was the complete ban of parents being able to actually make that choice.
Well, that's an interesting assessment, because this bill really puts the onus on the platforms, and it doesn't say under 16 can't be on social media. It says under 16-year-olds may not go into the contract of getting an account. Mm-hmm. So technically speaking, in a parent's account, if a parent allows, a 15, 14, 13-year-old could be on those platforms.
Correct. So the parent will have to make the actual account, and their child will have access to it. But as far as the child having their own account, so I brought up the economic part of it. Well, what if a child makes money off of their platform? And we know that we see that there are a lot of children influencers who, support their family.
We actually did stories involving them. Yes, 100%.
Correct. And so parents do not have an opt-in or even an opt-out option. And I brought that up to one of the bill sponsors, Rep. Soroy, about, well, what if we allow parents to still have an opt-in option? And the response was no, it's just a blanket no. And so what my fear is, we've seen the legislature, the Republican-ran legislature, say, "Oh no, we're not going to go any further. We're not going to go any further." And we saw that with the abortion ban, the 15-week, and then the 6-week. And then this very session, we had a bill filed. It was only in the House, but it was a complete ban. And
so the difference with the abortion bill is no one ever said we're not going to go further.
Well, that was conversation with the 15-week abortion ban based on conversations I've had. And then the 6-week ban came.
That we were not privy to in the
Correct.
public.
Yes.
Okay.
And so now we are saying parents have the absolute inability to make that decision as far as social media is concerned with their children.
Let me ask you about the bill. This, it's not a long bill to read. It's an easy read, and it really goes to the it's almost like, I don't want to characterize it as an attack, but it is totally telling the platforms, here's what you can do, here's what you cannot do, and the heart of it is the addictive components of the algorithm that keeps kids and maybe adults scrolling. And that seems to be the heart of the bill. How do you get the platforms to take responsibility for not targeting people with this psychological component?
So because Rep. Rayner's bill was the initial bill, we've had extensive conversations about this, and I do agree with her. She said that the bill speaks to the addictive functions of the bill, of the platforms. And there are some platforms based on the revised or amended version that we received back from the Senate when we ultimately voted on it in the House. It is about the addictive, the consistent scrolling and those type of algorithm features, which I completely understand. But when we are still talking about, well, how are we in the state of Florida really empowering parents to have these conversations? And I brought this up in one committee, Rep. McFarland, she was like, well, no, I actually brought this up on the floor the first time we saw the bill. And she was like, well, why are we making parents do even more? And I went back to my high school teaching days where I'm like, well, we would actively have conversations with parents so that they know how to develop that new level of conversing with their teen. Like, hey, what's going on? What is this? Actually facilitating more conversations and more probably deeper and intimate conversations with parents and their children. And so I was like, this is an opportunity, because I filed an amendment that actually took the language from Arkansas, because this bill is like the bill in Arkansas, and it allows for a parent opt-in. And so that was my response to her. Well, parents can have better conversations and deeper conversations and still having the ability to make the ultimate decision.
So you're a lawyer by trade. Do you see anything about this that's challengeable in court?
I think there are. I think the parental consent is most likely going to be challenged.
And what grounds would that be?
Well, when you're in law school and you start your family law courses, one of the main points that my professor made over and over in case law and everything was parent to child relationship is one of the most intimate relationships, and the government really has to have a compelling interest to intervene into that relationship. And so that's what I kept going back to. I don't practice family law by no means, so I rest on my knowledge from law school and having different conversations with colleagues about it. And we all feel, if this gets challenged, it could be based on the First Amendment or even censoring parents and their ability to raise their child how they want.
So such an interesting dynamic, because there's so many people in the legislature that of your party and that you're close to that really are on board with this for mental health reasons. So we will see.
Yes.
Ashley Gant, state rep, Democrat from a big part of Miami-Dade. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for
having me.
We got
a couple of weeks left to talk about all kinds of bills, so stay in touch.
I definitely will. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, stop the presses. Florida's defamation bill targeting anonymous sources heads to the House floor, and its sponsor is here live next. Headed for a House vote, a bill to make news media more accountable for their reporting. And who wouldn't want that? Well, it's complicated because a free press with constitutional protections is a key part of keeping government honest by keeping you in the know. But then, what about media bias, intentional or not, or carelessness, or incompetence? The bill mostly takes aim at anonymous sourcing, and one of the most interesting parts of the debate is the opposition coming from both Democrats and Republicans for different reasons. The person taking most of those slings and arrows as the bill goes through the debate is the sponsor, State Representative Alex Andrade, Republican from Pensacola, right there with us live this morning. Representative Andrade, great to have you on.
Hey, good morning, Glenna. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So you have, I love this quote that you gave in one of the committee meetings. Hey, this is journalism 101. Explain that.
Well, Glenna, I'm going to assume right now that you as a professional journalist hold off on maybe publishing a statement of fact if you only have one source providing you that fact before you report it, whether or not it's anonymous. You do your best to fact check and double check or get a second source before publishing a statement of fact that might run the risk of harming someone's reputation. The bill doesn't change the standard for what's called actual malice, which is what New York Times versus Sullivan created for public figures. If you're a private figure, if you're a private individual and you've been defamed, you go to court seeking justice for the defamation you suffered, the harm to your reputation you suffered. You only have to prove someone was negligent when they talked about you and defamed you. For public figures, people who've been on a ballot, people who are in government, people who are famous for whatever reason, a lot of times they have to prove this actual malice standard, which is much higher than negligence. It's with knowledge that something was false or with reckless disregard for whether or not something was false. The bill just says if you used an anonymous source, a single anonymous source and nothing else, there should be a presumption of actual malice if what you said about that person turned out to be false.
So let's, when you quote New York Times versus Sullivan, actually, I think the 60th anniversary of that unanimous vote is coming up in the next couple of weeks. And that kind of has been, well, it has been the standard for all of this for the last 60 years. And what that says is that the First Amendment protects all statements, to your point, about public officials, except when made with actual malice. And that's has been a protection for mistakes or not an intentional mistake or carelessness, to sort of keep the press as free as possible. And defamation, of course, has to have an actual a damage, a hurt reputation to go to court. But so taking an anonymous source, and yes, to answer your question, yes, I would never personally do anything unless I was ironclad sure. But when you take an anonymous source, let's say that anonymous source works in government or works in a company at great risk to his or her own safety, is a whistleblower. Whistleblowers have protections. So why would this be any different?
Well, this wouldn't be any different, Glenna. And I think that's the big distinction. I think a lot of people, many people don't even know that defamation lawsuits are brought all the time right now. This bill would not change a single case that has been brought forward to court in the past 60 years since New York Times versus Sullivan. The big concern is that people see a legislator codifying what every single verdict has been rendered on the topic has said in this context for the past 60 years. And they're just concerned that a legislator is doing it. I would disagree that this bill talks mostly about anonymous sources. There's, I think, 7 sections. Only one section talks about actual malice and anonymous sources. But every journalist I've ever talked to says, no, they would never publish a statement of fact based on a single anonymous source because they consider it journalistic malpractice. All the bill says is, if you do end up doing that based on a single anonymous source, and it turns out to be false, you have to show your math. You have to show everything you did to try and fact check or confirm that statement that turned out to be false before you published it. You don't have to disclose your source, but you better show how you tried to fact check that source before publishing a statement that turned out to be false. I think you could be able to show any documentation you looked at to try and confirm that source's statement. You can look at other individuals who you might have contacted to try and confirm that statement. You can talk about your state of mind and impressions in discussing with that anonymous source before publishing. What you can't do is act as if that's a get out of jail free card and operate accordingly.
And all of that would be done when this rises to litigation, and this would be in the court.
Yeah, and this doesn't change what can and can't be sued over. This wouldn't change the number or types of defamation lawsuits that can be brought, that are brought right now. This is what I consider kind of like a glorified jury instruction. There should be a rebuttable presumption at the end of a jury trial where jurors can presume that if there was no due diligence done by that reporter or that journalist before they published this statement that was false, if it was based on a single anonymous source, jurors should be able to be told, yeah, this is an example of reckless disregard for whether or not that statement was true or not. And I think I have not found a single journalist who's disagreed with me on that point.
So do you think just the mere specter of a bit easier litigation path would be a chilling effect on someone, a journalist, who really does have facts from, or this journalist's management, that chilling effect to publish because of the specter of possibility of lawsuits? Is that a chilling effect on the press?
If you're a journalist that is not aware that defamation lawsuits happen right now, I don't know what to tell you. These defamation lawsuits occur right now. The main thrust of the bill, aside from that one section on anonymous sources, the main point of the bill, from my perspective, is making sure we clarify certain things about newspapers that publish articles online, needing to retract or correct articles if they've been published online, and also this concept of a veracity hearing. The purpose of the bill for me, I'm just passionate about dispute resolution. If I can pass this section in the bill called a veracity hearing, these defamation lawsuits could be resolved much more quickly and efficiently, save both parties a lot of money. It would protect defendants who are being sued abusively, and would also allow plaintiffs who normally right now have to wait 3 years for a jury verdict to come out to clear their name. It would allow them to clear their name in the context of a lawsuit that they feel forced to bring while they wait for that jury verdict on the back end. There's a circumstance where, Elon Musk got sued for a tweet calling someone a pedo guy, a pedophile a few years back. He had to wait 3 years to finally win that lawsuit because that's just name calling, which isn't defamation. If this bill were to pass, he would have been able to get out of that lawsuit within months instead of years. And that's the whole purpose for this bill.
Let me ask you, in the short time we have together, a quick question about the veracity hearing. Would the veracity hearing put the judge in charge of fact-finding instead of the jury in charge of fact-finding?
No, it's a motion for summary judgment standard, except the veracity hearing wouldn't be adjudicating liability as well. A summary judgment standard is if there's no actual dispute over the facts, the court can issue an order. What this means is if I'm the plaintiff and I had to file a lawsuit to clear my name, I can ask the judge to essentially have a summary judgment hearing and rule that the statement of fact that I'm suing over was a statement that was false. It would allow me to clear my name without going to the liability or damages or anything else. But it all depends on whether or not there's an actual dispute of fact. That's why judges can grant summary judgment motions for plaintiffs right now for liability. This doesn't reach nearly as far and is absolutely constitutional from that perspective.
Do you think that the Senate still has a way to go? It doesn't seem to be moving all that quickly, and I'm not quite sure I'd even what to compare that to, but it seems like the House is taking it up a lot faster than the Senate. Do you have any concerns about the Senate side?
No, I'm not concerned. It's moved through half of its committees. I'm not concerned. The bill sponsor is very passionate about it as well on the Senate side. So there's still 2 weeks in session, and that's a lifetime if you've been in the process.
The 2 weeks left in session. Alex Andrade, rep from Pensacola, Republican, and sponsor of the defamation bill. It is great to have you on the program. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
And coming up, answers to your questions about measles and a South Florida outbreak. Here are the addresses again to use right now. TWISF, which is This Week in South Florida, at WPLG.com. And you can also reach out on Twitter, X, at WPLG Local 10. And after the break, South Carolina Republicans hand Donald Trump another primary win this weekend. Florida votes next month. A look at who will be going to the polls next. South Carolina Republicans gave Donald Trump another primary win in Nikki Haley's home state, South Carolina, this weekend. Florida voters have another few weeks to our presidential primary. That's March 19th. And if you are not registered to vote in that, too late. The deadline came and went this week. The supervisor of elections in Broward County is Joe Scott, right here to crunch some of those numbers, which includes some interesting party switches. Welcome, Joe. Welcome to the table.
Good morning, Glenna. Thanks for having me.
Good morning. So the party switch, well, first of all, Broward County is the most Democratic county in the state.
Right.
And 800 or so people who were Democrats switched to become Republican Party members in Broward County.
Yeah, so that number actually went up a little bit since that story came out.
Oh, you bring the latest numbers.
So it
bring
ended up
being,
so we ended up having about 2,500 people switch to Republican since January 1st, between January 1st and the deadline that just passed on Tuesday.
All right, so I know the Republican Party of Florida has made a giant effort over the past 2 years to bulk up the numbers. Statewide, I think, and I don't have the latest numbers in front of me, but 700,000 to 800,000 more Republicans statewide than Democrats. But in the most Democratic county of the state, why would that happen? What are those former Democrats thinking?
Yeah, no, so it's interesting because, so one thing about Florida is because we are a closed primary state, you do have to be registered. In other places, what we did see through this primary season is that, excuse me, there were folks who, you know, would come out who were registered as independent, registered as no party affiliation, as we call it here in Florida, and they would go be able to vote. So in other states, they have the rules allow people from different parties to still vote.
Iowa and New Hampshire are
Right.
two of those, and we were there, you know, and that was happening a lot.
Yes. Yeah. So here in Florida, you actually have to make that switch before the deadline, which is 29 days before the election. So I would encourage people not to read too much into this as if there's some kind of shift happening within Broward County, right?
Going.
But it is, you know, 2,500 people moving to Republican represents about 1% of the registered Republicans in Broward County.
But then I am surprised by that.
Yeah.
Should I be? Is that surprising to you?
It is a little bit. That it ended up being so many people right there at the end. And honestly, 2,500, even though it's only 1% of the total Republicans, you know, if you look at even with the Iowa caucuses, you only saw about 15% turnout, right? Mm-hmm. So if we end up with 15% turnout, then that could end up being somewhere in the neighborhood of 7% of the voters, assuming these people who bothered to change their party here at the last second are probably more likely than most to actually vote.
And we can't ascribe what they're thinking. We don't know why they're voting, who they're voting for, or why they vote the way they do.
Sure.
But what might be interesting to see is if there is a change back afterwards. That'll be the telling.
That will be the real test, yeah.
So this is, you know, maybe a conspiracy going on here in Broward County. So let me talk about the primary coming up on March 19th.
Sure.
There is no Democratic primary for Florida.
Correct.
Because the Democrats have already chosen Joe Biden as their Florida winner.
Right. So the way that their process works, because they only had one candidate qualify, there's no primary.
So everyone going to the polls will be Republican voters, and Republicans will see a ballot with a lot of names on it, not just Donald Trump and Nikki Haley.
True.
Why are those ballots going to have people like Vivek Ramaswamy and there's like 6 other names?
Right. So there was actually a deadline that passed in November. So, you know, and I feel like we're probably going to get a lot of people asking this question, and the reason is that you hear it on the news. So the person will go out and make an announcement, I'm withdrawing from the race, right? That's not an official action. They need to actually file paperwork to have their name removed from the ballot. And a lot of these people didn't do that in time. They didn't meet the deadline.
So what happens if a Florida Republican goes in and votes for one of those people who has suspended his or her campaign? His campaign, there are no hers that have suspended.
You know, so we count the votes and we report the results. So ultimately, if you want to vote for one of those people who already withdrew and their name is on the ballot, you can vote for that person and it'll show in the results how many people voted for each of those folks. For most people, I wouldn't read too much into it because somebody who has announced that they are not part of the race anymore is probably not, a lot of people aren't going to vote for them. A lot of the voters who come out for these primaries, they do tend to be the more sophisticated voters. So they already are kind of paying attention. It's not as if they're looking at these names for the first time when they see the ballot, right? They already know who they're showing up to support, and a lot of the support will go to those candidates that are still contesting the election.
Yeah. For a minute, let's talk about the people who may not be that engaged, but who want to be engaged and who want to vote. Having your registration done, it's too late for the presidential primary. You have to be registered. But to people who want to vote by mail, for instance, is there still time to get your vote by mail ballot to ask for one for the primary?
Absolutely. And, and it's something that everybody could do. It takes about 2 minutes on our website, browardvotes.gov.
And this is for any county too, Miami-Dade or Monroe as well.
So, so obviously my website would just be for Broward County, but Miami and Monroe County also have their own. But yes, you can go on, you can make a request your vote by mail ballot. You can actually request for all the elections happening this year. One thing that's important for folks to know, especially those 2,500 people who could be some of your viewers here, who switched, is that if you do want to vote in the Democratic primary in August, because in August there'll be a primary for other offices, so for members of Congress and state reps and state senators and those types of folks who will be on the ballot in August. If you want to participate in those partisan primaries, then you should, make sure you make that action happen sooner rather than later, because you'll have that same deadline 29 days before the election.
Right, and what I really want to hammer home is that the rules have changed, and now when you get you ask for a mail-in ballot and you get one, there's an expiration date to that request. So you have to keep requesting your vote by mail ballots.
Correct. So after the general election that happens in November, so in November of every even-numbered year, after that election, you basically would have to go back. So basically, if you think about the odd number years, January of an odd number year is a good time to think about going back and requesting all of your vote by mail ballots for that next upcoming election cycle.
Did you see in your office a real confusion or scramble by people who thought that they would be able to vote by mail with this switch?
We did have some calls. We had people who reached out to the office because they were used to getting their vote by mail like clockwork, and now they didn't get one for this upcoming election. So we did actually get some people reach out, and we had to notify them that, hey, you need to put in a new request. You have a request in. So that is something, and I expect that to be much more as we get closer to August. August and November, we'll see a lot more.
And we do a lot of work here to educate and inform and urge people to participate and vote, and so we appreciate all those outreach efforts.
Yeah, absolutely.
We were going to talk about the election bill that's coming up, but that's gone.
It is, it's gone.
What a difference a week makes.
Absolutely.
Joe Scott, thanks so much. Go ahead.
Oh, Glenna, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Great to have you, and you are definitely keeping in touch with us as we march toward next month and see what happens.
For sure.
All right, take care.
All right.
All right, South Florida's public health enemy number one at the moment, measles. The outbreak growing this weekend. Addresses to use if you have questions right now, send them in, twisf@wplg.com. If you love Twitter, X, we are at WPLG Local 10. And we'll get some answers real time with one of South Florida's go-to infectious disease experts next. The numbers are rising this weekend. More cases added to the outbreak of measles, and not all of them at Weston's Manatee Bay Elementary. Sudden cases of a once eradicated super contagious disease not only took the school district and health departments by surprise, but raised South Florida's most pressing public health questions since the COVID pandemic. And some of those are again mired in a partisan debate. Dr. Eileen Marty is one of South Florida's most notable infectious disease experts, having guided public health policy through Zika and then COVID, and now a professor at Florida International University. Right here, back at the table, still is kind of a safe distance apart, are we? I don't know. Not to you, I'm sure. Great to have you here. Welcome back.
Always a pleasure.
And now I feel like, we spoke. What is happening? Why is this happening now?
Well, this is the most contagious virus of humans.
Wow.
So it really doesn't take a lot of unvaccinated people to allow for there to be a significant number of cases. Think of it this way. First of all, if you think about how contagious SARS-CoV-2 was, it caused COVID, maybe 2 out of every 4 persons, so each person that got it maybe infected 2 to 4 other people. Measles will infect 15 to 20 people per person amongst the unvaccinated.
So let me just bring you down to the school level. We've been talking about this all week. A lot of people really may not have engaged totally, especially people without kids in school. But at the school level, I remember my kids could not go to school without that chart showing that they have been vaccinated, and MMR, measles, mumps, rubella, was right there. Why are kids allowed in school unvaccinated? How did that happen? And part 2, if unvaccinated kids are in school, what's the point of mandating it?
Well, first of all, when we had those mandates, we were closer to the time when when it was common to get measles. We were much more aware of how dangerous and horrible this infection is. And school districts, and Florida in particular, was phenomenal at making sure that these outbreaks didn't happen. But as we got away from that and the vaccines became so effective, people forgot how dangerous this virus is, and they started allowing changes, allowing more people to opt out of vaccinating their children.
And to opt out, is there a reason that you have to provide? Do you have to prove anything, or you just say, this is my personal choice?
It's different in different states. It used to be that you had to have extremely good reasons to opt out. And for example, when there was a big outbreak in California a few years ago, they had lax allowances where people could simply opt out for ideologic reasons. But after the big measles outbreak, they switched it. And unfortunately, we've gone the other way here in Florida, where we were very strict, and now we're allowing for ideologic reasons to opt out.
So there are, at the moment, if my numbers are updated, 26 cases in 12 states. And Florida has by far the most dangerous situation at the moment. And is that because of schools? Is it because of travel? Is it because of both?
It's because when the outbreak started, we did not take the public health measure of immediately calling for full vaccination of all people who are not properly vaccinated.
So I immediately think of the COVID vaccine debate when I hear you say that. Has COVID and the debate over public health policy there affected now this measles outbreak?
Yes, absolutely, and also for a different reason. There were also thousands, more than 60,000 missed vaccinations during the time that COVID raged, primarily between 20 and 2022, not now for ideologic reasons, but for not getting together, not going to the doctor. Those sorts of reasons were foremost. Then after all this happened with the COVID-19 vaccines in terms of ideological debates instead of scientific ones, we find ourselves with more people that don't have that sense of the safety of the vaccine and the risk from the actual wild virus infection.
Do you see an actual fear of the vaccine, as we saw a fear of the COVID vaccines? You know, measles vaccine isn't new, COVID was. Is there a comparison there?
Well, what happened in the late 90s is that a very unscrupulous physician published in The Lancet a completely falsified article that all his coworkers later, said, oh no, this was wrong. He actually used false data from cases in hospitals and claimed that the measles, the MMR vaccine was related to autism. However, thousands of subsequent studies delving deep into the cases he reported, everything has absolutely demonstrated that that was false.
How does something like that get published in such a venerable publication in the first place?
Yeah, Lancet is an absolute top journal, and unfortunately, the peer reviewers didn't request the hospital records for those cases and believed the false data that this individual provided. And that was part of what started the controversy.
Wow. You know, from the perspective of news, misinformation and disinformation, it can be catastrophic like that. So before I want to take some questions that are coming in, but before we go there, I just want to give a sense of measles, the disease. Is it survivable? Is it repairable? Well, give us a sense of the most contagious disease that you called it. What is measles?
So measles is an RNA virus. Okay, it's actually more closely related to, say, the flu virus than it is to
Looks like
SARS-CoV-2.
chickenpox. Is it related to chickenpox?
Not at all. No. That's a
skin pox.
DNA virus. Very different virus. Very different. But this is a virus that has a few different receptors that it uses to get into different cells. One of the ones that it uses is a receptor that goes into epithelial cells, the surface cells in your GI tract, right? So in your mouth and all that, and in your respiratory system. And then the virus is so nasty. It's so sneaky. It sneaks between cells to avoid the immune system and fuses those cells. And then the immune system's trying to fight it, and some of the cells slough off, and then you cough them up.
This sounds like a drama series.
It is.
So that's why it's so contagious.
It's
because
super contagious because you're coughing out and sometimes sneezing out just massive amounts of this virus that can cling right onto these receptors on the epithelial cells. Plus, it has a receptor for immune cells. So the immune cells get infected. And that's one of the big problems with the measles virus, because it brings down all the red and white blood cells in your system. So you're anemic and your immune system is low, so you're more susceptible to other infections. This is why it was such a killer.
So I want to, we're up against a break, but we're going to take that quick break. And when we come back, we will be answering your questions real time. Still have time to get them in. One more look at the addresses. If you have a question for Dr. Marty, we will get in as many as we can. TWISF@WPLG.com is the email. And if you're on Twitter, X Twitter, at WPLG Local 10. We are back with Dr. I always want to call you Aileen, and it's Eileen Marty, and your questions about measles specifically, my go-to infectious disease expert. So if you have questions about other diseases too, I suppose that's okay. But I want to get to a couple of these really quickly. This person, Stephen, wrote in not so much a question as a comment, and it's something I really want to talk about because a lot of people find it very awkward to talk about this. Stephen says it's not a parental rights issue, it's a public health issue. And the Surgeon General's position allowing parents to send unvaccinated children to school in the wake of measles, according to Stephen, is absurd. A lot of people feel that way. And since COVID, the whole question of parents' choice in public health has been on the front burner. What say you?
Well, if you send an unvaccinated child into a situation where there is measles in the atmosphere, that child has a 90 to 95% chance of getting measles. And that child then has a 1 in 5 chance of having a complication severe enough to put him in the hospital. And that child has a long-term risk of having neurologic problems from having had that. So it is enormously irresponsible to send an unvaccinated child into a zone where this virus is present, whereas a vaccinated child will only have a 2% chance of contracting the virus, and if they do, it's going to be a very mild disease.
So in this atmosphere where we are now, because we are in a state governed by the Surgeon General and the Health Department, and I just want to say we invited several people from several counties' health departments to come and sit and chat with us today, and we had no takers on that. So thank you for being here. But I want to stay with that point just a little bit, because speak to the parents, if it is now your choice, and I'm all about parents' choice, for the record, as a parent, but in public health situations, speak to the parents who now have those rights, and what would you advise them to do?
I would let that parent who has not yet vaccinated their child know that if they love their child, and I'm sure they do, they want to put that child in the safest possible situation that that child can be in. And the vaccine that we use against the measles virus has proven over decades to be an incredibly effective and safe vaccine that works against all wild forms of the virus and is going to keep their child safe. That the alternative is way too bad, and that saying a specific number of days is very naive, because as it gets passed from child to child, we keep shifting the dates at which it might be safe for an unvaccinated child to go back into the setting.
Okay, question from a parental point of view: do I keep my kids home?
From the parental point of view, the child should be fully vaccinated. That is the number one thing that you can do to keep your child safe. And that means 2 vaccines, not 1.
Okay, so Marcia is asking, can someone who is vaccinated still get measles?
There's a 2% chance of getting the virus if you are vaccinated. However, it's going to be very mild, because the current measles vaccine will effectively prevent severe disease.
So thinking back to the school issue with COVID, I feel like this is mirroring what we've already been through. So let's learn from that, right? Should parents send their kids to school with masks if they want to? Would that be helpful?
The mask will always reduce the risk of getting an infection that's transmitted by the respiratory route, and measles is transmitted via the respiratory route. But it is much better to be vaccinated.
I think we have time for one more question. In school, I really want to stay with this, because if parents have the job to do, let's help parents do that job. So thinking back to COVID, thinking about the school atmosphere, and really we're talking about shopping malls and movie theaters. There is measles around. We learned that COVID was transmissible, but then you had to stay 6 feet away and you were, relatively better. What I'm hearing from you is measles lingers longer in the air. So those classrooms, that movie theater, that store, that gas station, are people at risk even in the moments or hours after? I mean, how long?
Well, we've known for a long, long time that measles is in aerosol form and can be transmitted at considerable distance. And again, it is very, very contagious. So if you are unvaccinated, yes, for a few hours after somebody was coughing up measles in a room, that room may have enough measles virus in the air for you to breathe it in and get sick.
An hour?
Yeah.
And how would you even know that? How let me just end with this. We are in a situation now where there is a rise in measles cases. I don't want anyone to be afraid for no reason. Set the tone. How do we keep ourselves safe from specifically measles right here, right now?
We need to have an extremely high percentage of people fully vaccinated because of how contagious this is. Typically, we say 95%. Ideally, it should be 98% vaccinated against the measles virus, or even 100%. That really reduces the risk to the entire population. There are always going to be some individuals that, because of some underlying condition, cannot be vaccinated. We need to protect those individuals from that. And by the way, people with HIV, people taking immunosuppressives, pregnant people are at extremely high risk. Children under 5 are the most high risk from pneumonia from this. People over 20 are most at risk for the neurologic complications that you get from measles, blindness, deafness. This is a very serious disease.
I think you have made that point abundantly clear. Dr. Eileen Marty, great to have you here. Thank you so much for your deep, deep knowledge on this. Really, really appreciate that.
Thank you.
And we will be right back. Thank you, as always, for spending this hour with us. Have a beautiful Sunday and keep in touch.